revealing Africa's role in the slave trade. The untold story. Have you ever wondered about the untold stories behind one of history's darkest chapters? Imagine a time when entire communities were torn apart and lives were forever changed. We're diving into a lesser-known aspect of the transatlantic slave trade, shedding light on Africa's involvement. You'll uncover surprising facts and hidden truths that challenge everything you thought you knew. By the end of this video, you'll have a deeper understanding of the complexities and human stories that shape this tragic period. Stick around because what we reveal might just change your perspective on history forever. Historical context and African involvement. When we talk about the transatlantic slave trade, it's important to understand that it wasn't just a European or American phenomenon. It involved various African kingdoms and leaders as well. So let's set the stage for how this complex history unfolded. The transatlantic slave trade began in the late 15th century and continued into the 19th century. European traders searching for labor to work in the colonies of the Americas turned to Africa, which they saw as a source of human resources. But the reality was far more complicated. African kingdoms and societies were not mere passive victims. They were actively involved in this trade. African involvement in the slave trade was multifaceted. Many African leaders and merchants engaged in the trade by capturing and selling individuals. This often included prisoners of war, criminals, and those in vulnerable situations. The capture and sale of these individuals were frequently driven by local conflicts and rivalries. One notable example is the Kingdom of Congo. The Congo, located in Central Africa, was a powerful kingdom that had significant interactions with European traders. During the 17th century, internal strife and power struggles within the Congo led to an increase in slave raiding. Rival factions would capture people from enemy territories and sell them to Europeans. This wasn't just about economics, it was also about political and military power. By participating in the slave trade, the Congo leaders were not only gaining material wealth, but also strengthening their positions against rivals. This pattern wasn't unique to the Congo. Across Africa, various leaders and kingdoms engaged in the slave trade for similar reasons. In West Africa, for instance, the Ashanti Empire and the Oyo Empire were involved in capturing and trading slaves. The trade routes that crossed Africa, moving people from the interior to the coast, were often controlled by African middlemen who acted as intermediaries between the European traders and the inland communities. But why did these African leaders and societies participate? The motivations were largely economic. The goods exchanged for slaves, like guns, textiles, and alcohol, were highly valued. For some, the immediate benefits of trading slaves outweighed the long-term consequences. Additionally, internal conflicts and power struggles made it easier to justify the capture and sale of individuals. It's crucial to recognize that while many African leaders participated in the trade, not all were complicit. Some actively opposed it. For instance, King Afonso of the Congo, who ruled in the early 16th century, initially welcomed the Portuguese, but later became a vocal critic of the slave trade. He saw the destructive impact it was having on his kingdom and tried to halt the practice, but his efforts were often thwarted by internal divisions and external pressures. Understanding this context helps us see the full picture of the transatlantic slave trade. African involvement was driven by a complex mix of local dynamics, economic motivations, and political power plays. The trade was not simply a matter of European traders exploiting passive African societies. It was a global system with multiple actors, each with their own interests and conflicts. Economic motivations and consequences. When we look at the economic side of the transatlantic slave trade, it's clear that this wasn't just about human suffering. It was also deeply tied to economic interests and trade dynamics. So let's dive into the motivations behind why African societies participated in the slave trade. Many African leaders and merchants saw the slave trade as an opportunity to gain valuable goods. In exchange for slaves, they received items like guns, textiles, and alcohol, things that were highly prized and sometimes necessary for maintaining power and influence. Imagine it like this. European traders came to Africa with ships full of goods and a demand for slaves. African traders, in turn, provided slaves captured from various conflicts or raids. This exchange was often seen as beneficial in the short term. Guns, for example, gave African leaders a military edge over their rivals. Textiles were a sign of wealth and status, and alcohol was a prized commodity in many communities. However, while these exchanges might have seemed advantageous at the time, they came with significant long-term consequences. The regions most heavily involved in the slave trade faced severe disruptions. The constant raiding and capture of people led to a massive loss of population. This loss wasn't just about numbers. It meant a reduced labor force for farming and other economic activities. Over time, the regions that were deeply entangled in the slave trade saw long-lasting effects on their economies. The disruption caused by constant conflicts and the loss of able-bodied individuals weakened local economies and political structures. Areas that once thrived with vibrant societies became some of the poorest regions in Africa today. Research shows that many of these areas, once bustling with activity and potential, now struggle with economic challenges. The trade left a legacy of depopulation and instability. Societies that had been rich in resources and people were left fragmented, with weakened economies and diminished social structures. Moreover, the slave trade also created an environment where internal conflicts were exacerbated. The drive to capture and sell slaves often led to more wars and violence within Africa, further undermining economic stability and development. So while the slave trade brought immediate benefits to those involved in the trade, through the acquisition of valuable goods, the long-term impact was devastating. It left a trail of economic hardship and social disruption that continues to affect many regions in Africa today. Moral ambiguities and local perspectives. The transatlantic slave trade wasn't just a matter of economics and politics. It also brought deep moral ambiguities and diverse perspectives within Africa. While some African leaders and merchants participated willingly in the trade, others saw it as a grave injustice. Take King Afonso I of the Congo, for instance. Initially, Afonso welcomed Portuguese traders, hoping for their support and trade benefits. But as the slave trade expanded, he became a staunch critic. He saw the devastating impact on his people and worked tirelessly to stop the practice, although he faced significant challenges in doing so. On the other hand, many African leaders and societies participated in the trade, driven by their own needs and conflicts. For them, the trade was intertwined with power struggles and economic gain. Today, the descendants of those involved often grapple with mixed feelings. Some feel guilt or shame about their ancestors' roles, while others struggle with denial or confusion. This legacy of the slave trade continues to affect how communities view their history and morality. Understanding these varying perspectives helps us appreciate the complex and often painful history behind the transatlantic slave trade, revealing how deeply it impacted individuals and societies on a moral level. Impact on African societies. The impact of the transatlantic slave trade on African societies was nothing short of devastating. The immediate loss of population was staggering. Millions of people were taken from their homes and communities, disrupting the social fabric of entire regions. But the damage went beyond just the loss of individuals. The slave trade fueled constant wars and conflicts. African leaders and kingdoms often raided their neighbors to capture slaves, leading to ongoing violence and instability. These conflicts weakened societies and created a cycle of turmoil. Social structures were deeply affected too. Traditional systems of governance and community life were disrupted. With so many people forcibly removed, villages and towns struggled to maintain their way of life and leadership. Economically, the long-term consequences were severe. The constant upheaval and loss of labor meant that many regions couldn't develop their economies as they might have otherwise. Instead of building wealth and infrastructure, these societies were left in a state of disarray. Today, many of these areas still feel the effects. The political instability and economic challenges that began during the slave trade continue to hinder progress. The legacy of this dark chapter has had lasting repercussions, shaping the difficulties many African countries face even now. Reconciliation and modern reflections. Today, many African countries are taking important steps toward reconciliation and reflection on their roles in the transatlantic slave trade. Acknowledging this painful history is a crucial part of the healing process. Across the continent, nations are engaging in open dialogues about their past. This includes recognizing the complex roles different societies played in the trade and addressing the long-lasting impacts it has had. Museums and memorials have become focal points for education and remembrance. These institutions are dedicated to preserving the history of the slave trade, ensuring that future generations understand its significance and impact. They offer a space for reflection and learning, helping to foster a deeper understanding of this dark chapter. Educational programs are also playing a key role. They aim to teach people about the history of the slave trade and its ongoing effects, promoting a sense of shared history and collective healing. Efforts like these are crucial for moving forward. By confronting and discussing the past openly, African societies are not only honoring those who suffered, but also working towards a more informed and united future. If you found this exploration into Africa's role in the slave trade enlightening, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more insightful content. Your support helps us continue to share important stories and perspectives. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.